There are words hiding in plain sight, words we use all the time that most of us only understand at a surface level. We hear them, we say them, we think we know them, but we don't. We're word shallow, but I want you to become word wise. Words like excruciating, passion, agony, sacrifice, redemption, and there's many others. They're ordinary words. Some of them are everyday words, but they carry more weight than most people realize. Because whether you like it or not, they were shaped by the Christian world that helped form English-speaking culture. For centuries, the story of Christ's suffering and death didn't just influence religion or art, it impressed itself into language. It gave certain words a depth, a gravity, an emotional charge that never really left. Some of these words were formed directly in that world. Others were already there but were sharpened and deepened and given new life through Christian thought and tradition. So what I want to do in this video is briefly walk through the passion and death of Christ, and along the way, pull out some of the words that become deeper and heavier and more meaningful once you dig into their origins. And in doing that, I really think it not only deepens our understanding of the words themselves, but also gives us a clearer glimpse into what was actually happening in those moments. Why certain words belong so naturally to that event. And once you see it, once you hear it, you don't hear these words the same way again. I know I don't. I can't unsee the deeper meaning. And if you enjoy digging into words like this, where everyday language turns out to have a much deeper story, you might want to subscribe, because that's exactly what this channel is about. Let's get wise to the words. Let's start at the beginning, the Passion of the Christ. Everyone knows that title, everyone knows that movie, but how many people really understand why the word passion is used? Because today, we use that word almost in the opposite way. Now, passion usually means a strong feeling or emotion, enthusiasm, desire, intensity. You're passionate about music, passionate about football, passionate about your new air fryer, or a new relationship. It all sounds very active, very driven, something rising up from within you. But the word itself comes from Latin passio, from the verb pati, meaning to suffer, to endure, to undergo. It's also where we get the word passive, and that's a clue. So originally, passion did not mean something you do. It meant something you go through, something you bear, something that is, in a sense, done to you. That older meaning is why Christians refer to the final suffering of Jesus as the Passion. It wasn't called that because it was emotional or dramatic in the modern sense, but because it was the suffering he willingly underwent. The scripture puts it in Isaiah, he was offered because it was his own will. He shall be led as a sheep to the slaughter. And yet Christ also says of his own life in the Gospel of John, no man taketh it away from me, but I lay it down of myself. And that is where the meaning really deepens, this passive sense of suffering. For the ancients, the passions were not active powers so much as things that acted upon you. You didn't have passion the way we see it today. You were subject to your passions. You have desire, fear, grief, anger. These were called passions because they were movements of the soul in response to something outside itself. And this passive aspect becomes even more evident in the agony in the garden. The night before he died, Christ went to pray in what was called the Garden of Gethsemane, also called the Mount of Olives. And this is where we get one of the most intense words in the whole Passion, agony. Today, agony just means extreme pain, but it comes from the Greek agonia, from agon, meaning struggle, contest, conflict. So agony is not just pain, it's pain with tension in it, pain with wrestling, pain under pressure. And that fits the garden perfectly, because this is the moment Christ begins to inwardly bear the full weight of what is coming. As the Gospel of Luke records it, "Father, if thou wilt, remove this chalice from me, but yet not my will, but thine be done." And being in agony, he prayed the longer, and his sweat became as drops of blood, trickling down upon the ground. There is even a rare medical condition known as hematoidosis, where, under extreme stress, blood can mix with sweat. Like blood vessels burst under the skin and then it comes out as sweat. So this was not just pain, it was a struggle at the deepest level. Not long after this, the struggle in the garden gave way to something colder: betrayal. Judas, one of his apostles, arrived with soldiers and identified Christ with a kiss, one of the most twisted symbols in the whole story. He betrayed Christ. And from there, Jesus is handed over again and again, first to the Sanhedrin, then to Pilate, then to Herod, and then back again to Pilate. And that idea of being handed over is more than just part of the story, it's built into the language itself. The word betray comes to us through Old French and ultimately from Latin roots, connected with handing over, delivering up, or exposing someone to another's power. A traitor comes from the same tradition of words, someone who hands over what should have remained loyal and protected. And even the word tradition comes from the Latin tradere, trans meaning across, and dare meaning to give. So literally, to hand over or to hand down. But what is handed over and why makes all the difference. A tradition is something handed down faithfully. But a betrayal is someone handed over treacherously. The story of the Passion keeps bringing us into contact with groups like the scribes and the Pharisees. And there is a modern word from the same root worth noticing. The word scribe comes from Latin scribere, meaning to write. A scribe was quite literally a writer. And from that same root, we get subscribe. Sub meaning under, and scribere to write. So to subscribe originally meant to write your name underneath something, to sign on, to say, I am with this. So if you could, please subscribe. And before Pilate handed Jesus over to be crucified, there is one more strange and almost eerie detail in the story, and that's Barabbas. Pilate gives the crowd a choice, as St. Matthew records it. "Whom will you that I release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, that is called Christ?" St. Mark tells us, but the chief priests moved the people that he should rather release Barabbas to them. And St. Luke records the cry of the crowd, "Away with this man, and release unto us Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber, a man who murdered someone in the act of sedition and rebellion. It's a bad guy. But the name itself is fascinating. Barabbas comes from Aramaic, bar meaning son, and Abba meaning father. So Barabbas literally means son of the father. What kind of irony is that? Here you have the crowd choosing Barabbas, a man whose name means son of the father, over the one who claimed to be the only begotten Son of God, the Son of the eternal Father. That's just crazy. Whether they consciously reflected on the irony or not, the language preserves it. And Pilate pretty much said, "I'm washing my hands of this matter." And he literally washed his hands. And that's where we get that phrase, washing your hands of the matter. Amazing. But before Pilate handed down the final sentence, he first had Jesus scourged and crowned with thorns. But the word scourge comes directly out of that world. It comes into English through Old French, escourge, meaning a whip or a lash. But it comes from Latin ex coriare, ex meaning out of, and corium meaning skin. After the scourging, Pilate presented him to the crowd one last time and said, "Ecce homo, behold the man." Probably because he barely looked like a man anymore. He was so torn to shreds. Then Jesus was given his cross to carry himself to his own execution. And on the way to the cross comes a quieter moment, one not recorded explicitly in Scripture, but preserved in Christian tradition. A woman in the crowd steps forward. In the middle of the blood, the mockery, the violence, she pushes through and offers Christ a cloth to wipe his face. The small act. She cannot stop what is happening. She cannot take away the cross, but she refuses to stand at a distance from his suffering. She gives the little she can. And tradition says that when he handed the cloth back, his image had been left upon it. And only afterward do we hear the name associated with her. She became known as Veronica. And that name has long been associated with the phrase Vera icon. Vera meaning true, and icon meaning image. And further on the way of the cross, Christ encounters the women of Jerusalem who are weeping and mourning for him. And this is actually a fitting moment to think about the word compassion. It comes from the Latin com, meaning with, and passio, meaning suffering. So compassion literally means to suffer with. And that is exactly what these women are doing. They cannot stop what's happening. They cannot take away the cross. But they don't remain distant from his sorrow and suffering. They weep with him. In the deepest sense, they show compassion. And finally, Jesus arrives at the place of his crucifixion, Mount Calvary, also known as Golgotha. So both names point to the same grim image, the place of the skull. And this is the crucial moment of the Passion. Today, crucial just means important, decisive, critical, a crucial decision, a crucial game, a crucial moment. But the word goes back to the Latin crux, meaning cross. It originally carried the sense of something cross-shaped, and then more broadly, something decisive or testing, something at the point where everything hangs in the balance. And that's exactly what the cross became. Not just in Christianity, but even in everyday language. The cross became the symbol, the turning point, the breaking point, the hinge on which everything depends. That is why we still talk about the crux of the matter, the central point, the thing everything else turns on. And the suffering of the cross was not just crucial, it was also quite literally excruciating. Today, excruciating just means extremely painful. Maybe your back is killing you. Maybe your dentist appointment was excruciating. Maybe someone's karaoke performance was a crime against humanity. But the word itself has this much darker history. It comes from the Latin crux, meaning cross. We are using a word born from one of the most brutal forms of suffering the ancient world ever devised. And now we consider sacrifice. Today, it usually means giving something up. You give up your time, you give up your money, your comfort, your sleep, your Saturday afternoon. But the word itself is more precise, more revealing than that. It comes from Latin sacrificium, and it's built from sacer, meaning sacred, holy or set apart, and facere, meaning to make. So to sacrifice originally meant quite literally to make sacred, to set something apart and offer it to God. And that's a lot richer than just losing something or giving something up. And in the older biblical world, sacrifice was not just about the thing being offered, it was also about what is represented. If someone offered an animal to God, the deeper meaning was not simply here's an animal. The animal stood in place of the offerer himself. It represented the person, saying in effect, this should be me, wholly given over to God. And once you step into that older sacrificial world, the meaning gets even deeper. One kind of sacrifice was what older religious language called a Holocaust offering. Not in the modern historical sense, but from the Greek holos, meaning whole, and kostos, meaning burnt. It was a whole burnt offering, completely consumed by fire, nothing held back. Another striking image is the scapegoat. The word developed from a scapegoat. It was the animal that symbolically had the sins of the people placed upon it and was then sent away into the wilderness or killed. It carried the guilt of the people away from the community. And all of this leads naturally to words like redemption and atonement. Redemption comes from the Latin redemptio, from the verb redimere, re meaning back, and emere meaning to buy or to purchase, the recovery of something lost, but at a price. And then there's atonement. This one is especially interesting because, unlike many of these words, it's not borrowed from Latin or Greek, but formed in English itself. It's traditionally understood as at one-ment, literally the state of being made one again. In other words, reconciliation after separation, union after division. Redemption emphasizes the cost, the price paid to bring something back, and atonement emphasizes the result. What was divided is made one again. So if this helped you see these words a little differently, a little deeper, then please subscribe. Now you're wise to the words.